Video Games Recon.
Hello and welcome. My name is Nate from Video Games Recon, and this video will be my opinion on a definitive endgame review of Destiny, i.e. up to and past level 20. So as like stated in my beta review, I will probably be making a complete review once I had a full picture of what Destiny has to offer. And seeing as there's a lot of controversy surrounding this game at the moment, I thought I'd weigh in and add my 2 cents. Also, a lot of the reviews out there in my opinion are incomplete, as a large proportion hadn't played Destiny up to or after the end game. And as someone who's done a fair bit of grinding after the level 20 cap and completion of the campaign, I figured I might have some extra insight to add. So, I'm going to lay out the format of this review as so. First, I'm going to discuss the pros and cons to this game. Then I'm going to go over some talking points inspired by things I've seen on the internet. Then talk about missed opportunities from Bungie's side and ways that they could make amends in the near future. And finally end with a summary and of course not forgetting our arbitrary score time. Please keep in mind this is just my humble opinion and yours may vary. Also, it's going to seem like at times I hate this game. That's not the case. You can still enjoy something even if it has many flaws. And FYI, this is probably going to be a long one, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd buckle in and give it a fair shake of the stick. But if you're not that patient, I'll put some of the points of interest in the timeline up on screen, in case you wish to jump ahead a bit. Anywho, without any further ado, let's do it to it. Okay, a lot of the pros to this game are similar to the pros from my beta review, such as, and starting off with, great graphics and visuals on all platforms and generations. Seriously, this game looks amazing, even on dated hardware. If there's any part of Bungie that should feel proud of themselves, then it's definitely the art department. The skyboxes and scenery in this game are genuinely captivating. Next, the audio and especially the music is awe-inspiring and really sets the mood and tone of your missions, sometimes more so than the actual story itself. I'm sure a lot of legacy Halo gamers are used to this quality, but for a relative newbie to Bungie, few games manage to match up to the production values laid down in Destiny. And speaking of production values, in general this game is a silky smooth experience and extremely well executed and polished. Some might say an extremely well polished turd, but personally that's not my opinion, and even though it does have some major flaws that we'll get into later. Anywho, production values as you would come to expect from Bungie are top notch. Gunplay and game mechanics have changed little from the beta, and are still fun, solid and extremely satisfying, and is one of the things that helps hold this game up in the long term. Also, the enemies are varied and plentiful, and the AI for the most part is good, aside from in a few rare cases. Not much to say on this one. The Sparrow and other vehicles are still bags of fun to blaze around the level on like a boss. Also, the glide and jump abilities are still very freeing, enjoyable and add an extra level of verticality to the maps. Also, the further down the skill tree you go, the more variation can be added to your glide abilities, helping to keep it fresh. The public events are still interesting and mostly very fun to complete, even if you get the wooden spoon equivalent in a participant reward, and can be the only thing that breaks the monotony of the free roam beacon missions. Why they didn't make the beacon missions more similar to the public events, I have no idea, as the public events for the most part are fun. Luckily the gameplay is still addictive, and this is mostly due to the gunplay, game mechanics, bounties, Crucible and even the loot, which has some major problems, which again we'll discuss later. Speaking of the Crucible, the PvP in Destiny is good, engaging and genuinely fun, and one of the only ways to grind in Destiny for loot without losing your fucking mind. However, aside from the verticality provided by your jump abilities and the use of your supers and grenade magic, the Crucible doesn't feel a whole lot different to other deathmatch games out there, like Call of Duty, Halo, Titanfall, Battlefield, and so on. That being said, aside from being nailed by a cheap super every now and then, it manages to stand toe to toe with all the PvP benchmarks out there. Next, the loot and weapon progression up to level 20. Although partially random, feels balanced and encourages you to keep on with the missions and strikes, as the rewards for the most part feel relevant, and you rarely feel like you need to step aside from the campaign to grind for XP or loot. The strike bosses at times can look and feel epic, aside from being a bit too damage spongy and a little dumb in terms of AI and strategy, which is confusing as the general enemy AI isn't that bad. Hopefully this will be addressed in future iterations, but with that said, there's definitely potential here. The slight increase of regular loot chest spawns from the beta was encouraging, however there still could be more chests and better loot inside. Bounties, although not the most user friendly in terms of checking if you have the bounties relevant to what you're doing, feel very satisfying to complete. Putting in a second super ability and skill progression such as the Sunslinger is a good idea and definitely adds some replay value. I'd like to see more of these in the future. And last but by no means least, weird and mysterious public events like new playlists, modes and things like the Iron Banner and the peculiar weapon and armor peddler, Zur, presuming you can find the prick, which I've only found once, even on days where he's supposed to be in the tower. I think the guy must hate me or something.
I do. It's because your face hurts my eyes.
Yeah, anyway. These things help to add an element of wonder that was promised before release and is sometimes lacking. Okay, so that was some of the most noticeable pros to Destiny. Now let's go over some of the significant cons to this game, starting off with the lack of content, specifically the campaign mode, as you can complete this whole game including strikes and reaching the level 20 light cap in under 8 hours easy. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if a speedrunner could complete it in 4 or 5 hours. And I know that Bungie said that Destiny is supposed to really get going at the end game, but that's not really true, unless you're a sadist and love to grind on missions you've already done before or are big into PvP. Next, carrying on the lack of content theme, is the absolute lack of story, lore, information or any resemblance of what's going on in this game. As aside from the start cutscene at the beginning and a further discussion with the speaker a bit later, there are barely any other cutscenes, and the scenes there are do nothing to explain what's going on or enhance the lore. And as such, you're left not caring much about anyone or anything in the game, as there's no significant story or character development, which is a shame for a game that pre-release promised a rich and intriguing world. And aside from the grimoire cards that are chock-a-block with lore and info on practically all things that for some insane reason cannot be accessed in-game, there is little to sink your teeth into, and as such you feel like you're playing a game that's given you a concussion or amnesia, as you get this sinking feeling that something coherent's supposed to be going on in Destiny. And if everything wasn't so vague and shrouded in mystery, you might even care about it too. Next, let's talk about the social experience, or lack thereof. As like previously discussed in the beta, aside from a short-lived novelty, the emotes function isn't fit for purpose and fails to convey anything of significance, and would have been improved by being able to toggle between novelty commands like dancing and so on, and useful commands like yes, no, stop, follow me, cover me, etc. Fortunately, Bungie has recently revealed that they are working on putting speech communication of some sort in the game, in matchmaking situations and maybe in the tower, which if implemented correctly will go some way to address this issue and make it possible to socialise with randoms should you wish to. The tower is a nice little bolt hole to pop in and out of and wander around between missions, strikes, bounty collecting, and so on. But it is incredibly small and with not a whole lot to do once there. Aside from a few vendors, some of which you'll barely visit, an item vault, message kiosk, and the odd public event like the Iron Banner, there isn't much point in hanging around, aside from collecting bounties and decoding engrams. With that said, I'm almost certain they'll expand this area in the future and put more things in it to do. But I wouldn't expect any big changes in the tower in the near future, as it takes time to develop things and Bungie has more than got its hands full on things to improve in this game. Now onto one of the most annoying things about this game, and that is the engrams, and how if you pick up a blue or purple rare or legendary engram and take them to the Cryptarch, he can, and most often, decodes them into a lower tier of loot, i.e. purples into blues, blues into greens, and so on, which is just retarded, as you've already spun the wheel of randomness to get a specific rarity of drop, and now you have to do it again with the Cryptarch, which is extremely disheartening if you collected a bunch of legendary loot drops that turn out to be just rare or uncommon pieces of equipment. And on top of that, being able to get armour from engrams non-specific to your class, i.e. getting a hunter's cloak or a titan's helmet if you're a warlock, and vice versa, is a major flaw, as you'd have to be a major fanboy to level up all classes in separate games just to make use of legendary or exotic armour. Now, this wouldn't be an issue if there was some sort of fair and balanced trading system between players, but there is no such option and isn't likely to be one anytime soon. Apparently the reason some of this is happening at all is due to a mix-up at Bungie, and supposedly this isn't how the engram system was meant to be implemented. But personally, I struggle to believe you'd go all the way through the process, including an alpha and a beta, and let this supposed bug or misunderstanding get left into the release version of the game. Instead, for better or for worse, it just sounds like Bungie trying to react to the negativity surrounding this issue on the internet. Golden loot chests. There are only 5 of these bad boys per planet, which is underwhelming to say the least. And on top of that, the loot inside seems to be map and mission specific instead of level specific. So if you go back at a later date and acquire the loot inside, it will most likely be junk, leaving little reason to go back for golden loot chests if you've already surpassed the planet in question. The underutilization of maps and missions in this game is rampant, as you are pushed through the exact same areas time and time again, when there are points on the map you rarely if ever go, and the missions are so samey they're pretty much all go there, open that, download that info, protect that area from waves of enemies, go somewhere else, fight a boss, mission over, rinse and repeat. There are a few instances where things get mixed up, but they are few and far between. Not that these are boring per se, as most of the missions still and can be fun, it's just a little unoriginal and repetitive. And speaking of unoriginal and repetitive, the beacon submissions are so boring and even more simple than the regular missions that after a while it feels like your brains are starting to melt and is akin to watching paint dry. Raids. Now these things sound amazing and like they've put a lot of effort into them and have even addressed some of the issues within missions and strikes previously discussed. And I say sounds because I haven't even played it yet, as because of its difficulty you'll need 6 players to be able to complete a raid. So you're probably thinking, what's the big problem? Just wait for 5 players to get match made with you. Impatient much? Well, the problem with that is there is no matchmaking on raids and some strike playlists. So unless you have 5 friends all online at the same time playing Destiny that are able and want to do the raid, you're shit out of luck and may never get to play this or any raid, which means 80 to 90% of the player base will never even get to play this mode, which just seems like a waste of time and resources which clearly should have been used elsewhere. That said, I think it's just a matter of time before they address this, possibly enabling matchmaking. Next, I would like to discuss how some of the supers in the Crucible are just way too overpowered or feel a bit cheap and lack skill to get kills with. Now, all supers are guilty of feeling a little cheap, but if careful can be avoided and or the execution messed up. However, the super that kills me all the frickin' time with seemingly no way to defend against it is the Hunter's Arcblade super. This thing seems way too OP and needs to be nerfed and tweaked along with the supers in general within the Crucible. Again, just like I said in my beta review, it's a shame there's no spaceflight in Destiny, which I think we can all agree would be hella cool and a perfect fit. And like I previously discussed in the beta review, I understand why this isn't in the game, as it would have taken away tons of resources which should be focusing on the core mechanics to the game. That said, with a massive budget, abundant development time, and very little in terms of game to show for it, I struggle to see why they couldn't have fit in spaceflight of some description, as there's barely anything to this game in terms of missions and things to do. In all seriousness, what the fuck have they been doing with their time? And lastly, this one is a personal issue for me, that I realise not a lot of other people will be suffering from, and that's that there is no audio sliders. Seriously, I can forgive that for the beta, but for the full release that's just ridiculous. I can't think of any game that doesn't have audio settings, not even one. What's that all about? Now, you're probably thinking, what's the issue? Well, when recording footage for the game I have to listen to the audio through headphones, so the noise doesn't bleed back into my microphone. And the sound through my headphones, which doesn't have an independent volume control, is just deafening. And as such, I've had to try and dampen the sound by cramming my headphones full of sponge, which is outright ridiculous. Now let's go over a few talking points, some of which are inspired by things I've seen online. Okay. I've heard a bunch of people saying that they were disappointed with Destiny as they were expecting a straight up MMO. Now, I'd have to call people on that, as if you played the beta, in no way could you be mistaken that this was going to be an MMO. Sure, it has some minor MMO elements, and I will give one caveat on this issue, which I'll discuss in a minute. However, after playing the beta myself, I knew at least the bare skeleton of the game I was going to get, as a beta is 90 to 95% plus complete and only really used for data tweaks, bugs, stress tests and balancing, and as such, unless you're a bit slow, at that point you can't expect the game to be completely different from a beta you only played 6 weeks ago. I'll give you, in the early promotional material, it did look like that was the sort of game we were going to be getting, and probably would have been a better game had it gone down that road. However, expecting a completely different game in such a short space of time is ridiculous. If people had been saying stuff like that after the alpha, I could let it slide, as you don't know how old the alpha build they released was. But after the beta, you kind of know what to expect in terms of a vertical slice of the game. And that leads me on to the caveat I was talking about, and that is, does Destiny suffer from an identity crisis? Trying to be all things to all people, with borrowing so much from different genres of gaming, instead of being its own thing. As it is a fair comment to say this game doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be a story-driven game, a twitch shooter, an MMO, an RPG, a dungeon crawler? I'm not sure. And worryingly, I'm not sure Bungie knows either. I think eventually Destiny will find its feet and decide what game it wants to be. But as of yet, I think Destiny's identity crisis is a fair point. If the purpose of Destiny was to make a first-person shooter, minimal story dungeon crawler with MMO and RPG elements, which seems to be the game that they've made, has it in the short term failed due to lack of content combined with a high price, as MMOs and even RPGs can get away with having low amounts of content, as it's impossible to pump out shitloads of content on day one. But their price usually reflects this, or they're upfront with you that it's a work in progress by asking you to become a founder. Alternatively, you can get away with asking for full or a high price if there is a lot of game available. However, at the moment Destiny has neither a low price or lots to do. So as for a short-term fail, I'd have to say probably. But I think long-term they'll most likely pull it back. But at this point in time, what the future brings for Destiny's fortunes, the jury's out. The next thing I'd like to address is Bungie saying that the game only starts to get going at level 20, when you need to acquire equipment with light in order to progress, which personally I don't mind as long as they implement it a bit better. First off, this is bullshit and stems back to Destiny's identity crisis and it thinking it's a dungeon crawler, when it just doesn't have enough content or diversity in missions to work as a dungeon crawler. So unless you like grinding, I call bullshit. However, playing devil's advocate for a minute, it's possible that this got misquoted and that they were talking about level caps in general throughout the life of the game, where that ethos could work, with more things to do, making it less repetitive and unnecessarily grinding. A lot of people seem to really not like the Ghost Companion, saying he was merely a glorified door opener who kept setting off alarms all the time, and that he was a little wooden. But for the most part I enjoyed Dinklebot, although sometimes his script was found wanting and a little insubstantial. Plus it is annoying when he's telling you stuff whilst it's all kicking off. Aside from that, I thought he was one of the only things in the whole game that was telling me anything about the lore of this world, aside from the speaker, who isn't exactly a talkative fella. Next, I would like to discuss the supposed $500 investment. This, if true, beggars belief. The only way this investment was well spent is if the $500 investment is for infrastructure of developing future Destiny titles and expansion packs. Otherwise, if I was Activision, I'd be asking Bungie what they spent all that money on. Now it could be that the investment in Destiny was well spent, and that they'd made more than enough content to make their FPS shooter / dungeon crawler ethos work, and that Activision or leadership at Bungie forced the team to carve up the content meant for the game into expansion packs and so on. Which I know is a little conspiracy theory, but it's not like this hasn't happened before in the gaming industry. Okay, I was just about to wrap up recording the audio for this video when I found out about the bug last weekend that lets some players see all the extra missions, strikes and raids that are presumably from the expansion packs that at one point was destined, pun intended, for the day one release that has been pulled from the disc, or is actually still on the disc in its entirety and has been cut from the game and put into the expansion packs to make more money. If this is the case, then shame on you, Bungie, for either agreeing to this or letting Activision bully you into it. This is completely the wrong mentality to have for a new IP, and it shouldn't matter if you lose money on this game as long as you build a strong franchise that you can cash in on responsibly later on, instead of going for cash grabbing tactics now which will turn people away from the Destiny franchise forever. Finally, a problem that a lot of games suffer from these days, and that's being overhyped. And this game is definitely guilty of that, being billed as revolutionary and as a COD killer. Some of which is their own fault by their early promotional material, making it look like a completely different game that it clearly isn't. And some of it is our fault by hyping things up and putting games that haven't even been released yet on a pedestal. Watch Dogs, anybody? Now let's discuss some missed opportunities. I'm going to shoot these off in no particular order. An optional matchmaking for missions, heroic missions, strikes and even raids is needed ASAP. Locking out content or creating too high of a difficulty scale for people who don't have a fire team is unfair and alienates your audience. I understand why this is the case for raids, as cooperation and communication is required in order to complete said raid, but locking out an important piece of content to 90% of your audience is just stupid. Instead, I suggest a microphone only matchmaking, so only people using microphones can join the lobby. That way there will be communication between players, so people without fire teams can play the content they spent their hard-earned money on. and it will add an extra social element to the game, which is clearly lacking in Destiny to boot. The lack of lore, at least in-game, is a complete oversight, as this universe is so cool and has the potential to be outright epic. And like I've stated before, there was more lore spoken about in the promotion of the game pre-release as there was in the game itself, aside from the Grimoire cards. And speaking of the Grimoire cards, why they were squirreled away on Bungie.com and not implemented in the game is beyond me, as most people will never go there and are starved for lore, that you have an abundance of hidden away on your website. I would like to see the Grimoire cards brought over to the game, as well as giving you a loot or experience bonus for reading and collecting them. More vehicle combat. There is nowhere enough opportunities to tear bitches up with one of those sweet rides, and the few chances you get to nail some bad guys with your pike is refreshing and bags of fun. And why there aren't more boss battles with vehicles is baffling, as it adds another layer of diversity that this game is clearly lacking at the moment. More super subclasses like the Sunslinger and so on would be a nice touch, as it gives you the chance to mix up your playstyle and another reason to play more, so as to level up your new class. However, this could easily be addressed in future DLC. The light level upgrade system is genuinely interesting and potentially a good idea, although due to the fucked loot system is ultimately flawed, and thus upgrading via light stops becoming interesting and instead becomes frustrating. I'd like to see this heavily tweaked along with the whole loot and engram system to stop it being so grind heavy, as even after grinding for hours you're often left with few or no rewards for your hard work. A non-super playlist in the Crucible is a must to appeal to the hardcore PvP element who feel that the supers, Arcblade, are way overpowered and give away cheap kills. Again, something easily implemented via updates. This one just baffles me. The removal of sword combat, which has clearly been coded into the game, i.e. the Son of Crota mission. I understand they may not want to take the game mechanics away from the gunplay, but swords could easily be brought into the game via a timed super or weapon ability. And the basics of swordplay have already been coded into the game, so it shouldn't be too difficult to implement. Making the worlds feel more expansive and interesting, with more interactions from both random players, NPCs, merchants, ghosts, and maybe even little things like sparrow races with random players or public event puzzles. FYI, I'm talking outside of the tower. More hard to find hidden secrets, Easter eggs or loot, as the loot in the golden chests are usually rubbish unless you find them in your first playthrough at said mission, or upon first unlocking a map. And the regular loot chests only seem to have crap weapons and armour or stuff like spin metal, spirit blooms and so on in them. So a chance of getting better stuff in all loot chests would be a good move. With the abundance of flaws and room for improvement that Destiny has, I thought I'd compile a list of ways that Bungie could make up for the disappointment of the Destiny community. Again, in no particular order, I think we'll start off with making the free roam beacon missions actually fun, as at the moment they're boring as fuck. Making matchmaking optional in some form for all content, so if you don't have a fire team of 3 to 6, you can actually play all of the content you paid for, i.e. raids and heroic strike / missions. Emotes that actually have a point instead of just being for novelty value. Making a place in-game specifically and solely for social interaction and communication with randoms or friends via some sort of text or audio communication. For example, something like the tavern from Star Wars would be hella cool. Fix the loot system to attribute weapons and armour based on skill and or hard work, not just randomness and luck. More golden loot chests, and the loot inside is relevant to your level and not the point in the campaign that you find it at. And again, not just random either. Make it less of a grind past the level cap, or at least make it fun and rewarding to grind. Lots more free DLC and new events to make up the absolute lack of content. A lot more story. Shit, some more story. Hell, any story will do. I'm not usually an overly story-driven kind of guy when it comes to games, but seriously, I have almost no fucking idea what is going on in this game, and without some sort of narrative in the near future, I think it's only a matter of time before I no longer care. Again, just like the beta, I need more. More varied missions, more submissions, strikes, loot, story, more content in general, as there just isn't enough replay value to keep this game fun in the short term. And lastly, but by no means least, they should seriously consider lowering the price of one or both of the expansion packs, even by as little as $5 or so. Just as a show of goodwill and a way of apologising for the meagre length of the game and the glaring flaws mostly surrounding the epic fail that is the loot and engram system. This would be a nice gesture for a community that they're trying to build a 10-year plus relationship with, and thus far have gotten off on the wrong foot with. Okay, to summarise, Destiny, although riddled with flaws, isn't a bad game. It has great production values, solid gameplay and mechanics, and is addictive, and for the most part fun, making it a good game. The problem with that is, this game was touted as being a revolutionary title that was set to bury COD and games of that ilk, and thus falls short of the hype, as this isn't a great game, not yet. I'm certain it will be eventually, but not for at least a year or 9 months, i.e. after the expansion packs, as there's just not enough development time before the DLC comes out to address big issues like the lack of story and minimal content as a whole. So like I said, Destiny is a good game with glaring issues that with time can and I'm sure will be addressed. I say this because even with these flaws, I've put many an hour into Destiny, as I'm sure some of you have, and even a large proportion of Destiny's haters seem not to be able to put the game down, even though they say it's shit, suggesting that there is a sliver of gold in this game that just needs to be extracted a little bit better by Bungie. And things like cutting up the game to put in expansion packs doesn't help your cause, especially with Sony gamers who may not have played a lot of the Halo franchise and are willing to give you the benefit of the doubt for old time's sake. So, with that said, it's time for my arbitrary rating score number thingy doojimy flop. I'll give Destiny a 7.9 out of 10 in its current guise. Think of it as a passing grade, Bungie. Your work is decent, but you can do a lot better if you concentrate more in class and stop listening to distracting influences like that Activision fella. So that just leaves me to say, what did you think of Destiny, and what score would you give it out of 10? Also, if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd help support us by liking, commenting, sharing, favouriting and subbing for more BS of a similar nature. Thank you and goodbye.